The Britons called it Pengwern, the hill of the alders. The Saxons called it Shrewsbury, town of the shrubs. But to us, it's Shrewsbury, or perhaps Shrewsbury, for centuries the county town of Shropshire and a historic regional centre of government. There's a wealth of legend about the place, and so much of the old town remains that it's a delightful place in which to spend a day out, to walk round and look at scenes which have remained pretty well unchanged for 500 years. This bird's-eye view of Shrewsbury is from Lord Hill's column, which stands by the A5 on the eastern approaches to the town. Lord Hill, like so many famous sons of Shrewsbury, earned his fame in foreign parts. He was born not far from the town, at Hawkston, and he became famous in the Napoleonic Wars. He was Wellington's second-in-command in the Peninsular War. He fought at the Battle of Waterloo, and he succeeded Wellington as head of the army. The town erected this column in his honour. It stands 133.5 feet high, and it's said to be the highest Doric column in the world. Just down the road from Lord Hill's column is the Abbey Church. The abbey was founded in 1083 by the Norman Earl of Shrewsbury, Roger de Montgomery. This tower was built at the time of Edward III, and that's him above the west window. But in the 1830s, the great engineer Thomas Telford wasn't going to let a little thing like 800 years of history stand in his way. So he built his road from London right through the old abbey ruins. Now, on one side of the road is the Abbey Church. The road runs through the middle. And on the other side, in solitary splendour, is the last remnant of the monks' refectory, the pulpit. I'd like to think that today's planners wouldn't be able to get away with Telford's cavalier attitude to the past. Shrewsbury lies in a great loop of the River Severn and is almost an island. Only from the north can you approach it without crossing the river. And if you're coming from the east, as I am, you cross the English Bridge. It's called that to distinguish it from the Welsh Bridge on the other side of the town, over which you pass, naturally enough, on your way to Wales. The English Bridge brings you to the foot of Weil Cop, one of the main streets of Shrewsbury, and certainly one of the most majestic. Its name is derived from the Welsh Chwelva, a road up a hill, and Cop, the top or head of a hill. But as a curtain raiser for the rest of the town, it certainly lets us know what we're in for, with its jumbled profusion of medieval and Tudor buildings. This, for example, is Mitton's Mansion, a splendid building stretching, 120 feet. The Mittons were a Shrewsbury family for centuries. Indeed, a Thomas Mitton was sheriff here 500 years ago. This recessed doorway shows how far back the original front of the house was. Over the centuries, additional fronts have been tacked on until the line is out where we find it today. Just above Mitton's Mansion stands the Lion Hotel, the main coaching inn in the town. Famous names stayed here in the last century: De Quincey, Dickens, Paganini, and Jenny Lind. Every few days, the coach from London would arrive at about 4 o'clock, driven by Sam Hayward, a coachman, it said, of legendary skill. People used to gather to see him gallop up the hill and turn his team of 6 horses in the coach into the narrow entrance and into the yard beyond without touching the walls, and the clearance on either side was only about 6 inches. People used to bet on whether the horses would crash into the gateposts or whether the coach would overturn. And looking at it today, it would appear to have been a difficult enough task, but bear in mind, in those days, the road was cobbled. The market square in Shrewsbury is dominated at one end by the old market hall, a legacy of its prosperous origins as a centre of the wool and corn trades. On the first floor, they used to deal in the wool, and the ground floor was the corn exchange. And on the wall, we can still see a row of peg holes, and it doesn't require much imagination to realize exactly what they were for. They were, in fact, a sort of ready reckoner to keep a tally of the quantities.
At the entrance to the market square, there's a statue of Clive of India, another Salopian who found fame and fortune overseas. His home is now a museum open to the public, and later on we'll take a look at it. But there's a lot to see on the way there.
Wherever you go in Shrewsbury, you'll come across little entrances, and very useful they are too once you get to know them, because they're the entrances to passages which connect one street with another. Now, quaintly, they're called shuts, and undoubtedly they're part of the medieval character of the place. Running up from the High Street is Grope Lane. Now, some people say it got its name from the fact it's so dark and narrow that you had to feel your way along it. Another explanation is that the darkness was the ideal setting for, well, how can I explain it? Certain goings-on.
At the top of Grope Lane is Fish Street, named after the fishmongers who used to trade here. And facing us, a marvellous piece of restoration.
The Bare Steps is the name given to this group of timber-framed medieval buildings. They're believed to date from the 14th century, and they were restored by the Civic Society some 8 years ago. The restoration work gained a Heritage Year award. As with all good projects of this kind, the old buildings aren't just restored and preserved in aspic, they're given a job of work to do. On one side, the building's being converted into a coffee shop where tourists can take the weight off their feet and maybe put it on elsewhere. The centre span houses the offices of several local conservation societies. The hall is probably the oldest in Shrewsbury. It's open to the public to come and see exhibitions of work by local artists, but it's an ideal setting for other events as well, such as meetings, lectures and recitals. Not far away from the Bare Steps is St Alkmund's Church, and close by is St Julian's. Now, St Julian's was declared redundant a few years ago, and so the church commissioners put it on the market. And the man who bought it is Andrew Wright. Andrew was a local craft dealer, and his idea was to get together a group of craftsmen to make and sell their products in the nave of the old church. He recognised that there could be a great attraction for people not just to buy goods in the place, but to watch them being made and talk to the craftsmen about what they were making and the tricks of the trade and so on. But why did Andrew Wright choose a church for the craft centre?
There are, in fact, 4 churches in Shrewsbury that have been sold. One has become a glassworks, one is about to become a hotel of a kind, another one has become a place for retailing pots.
And you've turned this into a craft centre with many, many crafts.
Many crafts.
Exactly, yes. What goes on?
Well, we're trying to both make and to sell our goods here as far as possible. You see, we're really trying to fulfil 2 main objectives. We're trying to satisfy our local community in the sense that we're offering them a chance to come and make individual orders of a kind they can't get in the supermarket, for example. And we're trying to appeal to the local, to tourists who come to our beautiful town, and casually walking around looking, perhaps we'll buy a small item here or there. So we're trying to do two things. And in both cases, they can both go along to our restaurant and enjoy a good vegetarian meal.
Now, I must put it to you, here you are carrying on a business or a group of businesses in what was a place of worship. Don't you feel a sense of sacrilege?
Well, as a practicing Christian, no, I don't. Because I'm sure that our Lord, as a carpenter, would have approved of woodwork being carried on. But much more seriously, if you look back to the medieval days, a church was a community centre in every way, wasn't it? It was a spiritual centre and it was a market centre. And I think that if we can't bring our religion into everyday life, then it's not a true religion.
There's a press which prints handbills and posters for local events and societies. There's a slate engraver who produces decorative work in this difficult medium. And there are other crafts too, from metalwork to needlework, and from pottery to woodwork.
One of Shrewsbury's most famous sons was Charles Darwin, the author of many scientific works, but best remembered for this, his Origin of Species. He was a pupil of Shrewsbury Grammar School, but his theories got him as bad a name here with the church authorities as they did anywhere. When the spire of St. Mary's Church here fell down in 1894, the vicar, one Reverend Newdigate Points, preached that it had been thrown down by God as a punishment, because Shrewsbury was organising a memorial to Darwin. Another great fall associated with St. Mary's was that of Robert Cadman. He fastened a rope to the steeple, and the other end was staked down in Gay Meadows, now the home ground of Shrewsbury Town Football Club, some 300 yards away and 200 feet below on the other side of the Severn. Using a small wooden tray with a notch for the rope, he started to slide down. He signalled for the rope to be slackened, but the guard crew misunderstood and tightened it. Halfway down, Cadman slipped off the rope and fell to his death among the spectators. The event is remembered by this plaque.
Let this small monument record the name of Cadman, and to future times proclaim how by an attempt to fly from this high spire across the Sabrine stream, he did acquire his fatal end. 'Twas not for want of skill or courage to perform the task he fell. No, no, a faulty cord, being drawn too tight, hurried his soul on high to take her flight, which bid the body here beneath good night.
To the north of the town, the two curves of the River Severn approached to within 300 yards of each other. It was on this narrow neck of land that the Norman Earl, Roger de Montgomery, built his castle on an earlier Saxon site. But 200 years ago, the castle was in the hands of Sir William Pulteney, then MP for Shrewsbury. Sir William invited the young Thomas Telford to restore the castle as a home for himself and his family. He also got Telford the job of Surveyor of Public Works for the county.
This is one of Telford's little touches. It's called Laura's Tower, after Sir William's daughter, and it gives a commanding view over the east arm of the river. The castle overlooks the railway station, which was built to serve the Shrewsbury and Chester Railway, but it's grown and grown over the years. The building started off with 2 stories and a tower, but when they needed to expand around the turn of the century, instead of adding on to the ends or the top, which would seem to be the obvious thing to do, they excavated the forecourt and the basement, and that revealed the new ground floor.
The sweep of the Severn, which lies to the south of the town, is a favourite stretch for the rowing crews of Shrewsbury School. On the far bank is the quarry, and in the quarry is the dingle, an old stone pit which has been landscaped and planted. It's a lovely sheltered spot to come and sit and think, or look at the flowers.
For many years, the merchants and craft guilds of the town held an annual festival at Corpus Christi. It was held on the King's Land on the other side of the river and was originally a religious festival, but as time went by, it became more and more devoted to revelry and drinking and fun and games. In fact, it became so boisterous, it had to stop.
The last vestige of those jolly days is this. It's the stone entrance to the shoemaker's bower, dedicated to their patron saint, Crispin. The bar used to stand, along with those belonging to the other guilds, on the King's Land. But when the festival came to an end, the bars were pulled down. All but this one, which was dismantled and re-erected here in the dingle.
The municipal flower displays are delightful, but hidden away behind the old walls, even in the centre of the town itself, are gardens that are more delightful still, like this one, the gardens of the Clive House Museum. This is the house where Clive of India lived when he returned to England after his exploits abroad. Clive seems to have led a charmed life. He went to India as a clerk in the East India Company, but transferred to the military wing of the company. In later exploits, he defeated Suraj Ad-Dowla, the man responsible for the Black Hole of Calcutta, and eventually became governor of Bengal at the age of 32. John Priestley, you're the curator of the Shrewsbury Museums, and here we are inside the Clive House Museum. I wonder if you could tell me, first of all, what sort of man was Clive?
Well, I think he was a very enterprising man who made a fortune in India and spent it on politics in his native country. This is his robe as Mayor of Shrewsbury. He was elected in 1762. I think the mayors of Shrewsbury still wear robes of that nature.
The cravat looks a bit grubby with the years that have passed by. What else have you got here in the museum?
Well, we have a collection of ceramics. We have the Regimental Museum of the Queen's Dragoon Guards, a little industrial archaeology, art, mostly connected with local events. And we have another museum not far away called Rowley's House Museum, which contains Roman archaeology.
Well, let's have a look at the ceramics, first of all, may we? What exactly have we got here on the table?
Well, these are a pair of ice pails from the 1790s. The food was put in here, there was ice underneath, and then you put more ice cubes around the top.
Absolutely ingenious.
And the illustrations are rather nice because the prints we discovered from the Royal Entomological Society can be dated to a book which appeared in the 1790s and which was only a year or two before these were made.
This is a charming piece in the middle of the table. What is it?
Well, it's an inkstand, Coalbrookdale, 1820s, 1830s period. Here's the spill vase, there's the ink pot, there's the taper stick for melting sealing wax, and these would have held wafers and sand. And then, of course, they'd have kept sealing wax and the quill pen in the middle.
Why they need wafers? What are they?
They would have been used to stick down the backs of the envelopes because they wouldn't have had sticky material there then. Now, this one is rather curious. It shows the polar bear based on engraving by Buick in a somewhat improbable setting, if it's meant to be Greenland. It would have been made at Coalbrookdale near Ironbridge and then would have been sent to London where the picture would have been put on. I think it's a very nice piece. It's part of what's called the animal service.
What we've seen so far have been charming and delightful, but on the other hand, I find these very ordinary.
Well, I find them very interesting. For the last 200 years, Shropshire has had a tradition of producing jugs in connection with elections. And this one, from 1796, two candidates, same party, who are cousins, fought each other bitterly to become the second member for Shrewsbury. This one claims that he had a majority of 44. In fact, so many of his votes were disallowed that his cousin won with a majority of 82.
Sounds like they had the jug made before the election results were out.
Yes. This one is rather different. This commemorates the fact that in 1832, Bishop's Castle, a neighbouring place, lost its two members of Parliament. And in doing so, the Whigs commemorated their victory, because they rarely won the seat, by producing this jug. It shows the voters saying that they you take away our lives when you take away the means by which we live. They used to sell their votes.
Right.
And here we have William IV and Queen Adelaide, and rather unusual figures for England, Scotland, and Ireland, commemorating the different parts of the United Kingdom. The two big ones refer to the fact that when one party won all the seats in Shropshire, they tended to produce a large jug which commemorated that fact. In 1835, this one has a rather nice slogan, when bad men conspire, the good must unite. But that, of course, could be used by any party of any political persuasion.
You mentioned the Rowley House Museum. What was the house?
The house was built in the late 16th century by a man named Rowley. It started out as a warehouse and contains our collection of material from Viraconium, which is now called Wroxeter. We have one great treasure in there, which is the inscription which used to be on the Forum, connected with the visit of the Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century. The other great treasure connected with Viraconium is this silver mirror from the 3rd century. This is the business part of it, but the decoration is the interesting part because that is of water lily stems. It was found about 50 years ago against one of the columns of the Forum, and whoever had stolen it or had hidden it obviously intended to return, and it used the Forum as a useful reference mark. But it was never collected, and archaeologists found it a century ago.
Lucky them is all I can say to that.
Yes, indeed. It's a great treasure. There are only, I believe, 2 others in the world.
From a military point of view, the town was always a hard nut to crack with a natural river defence. And even if you got across the river unscathed, there was still the town wall.
At the time of the Civil War, Shrewsbury was a royalist stronghold and was a natural target for Cromwell's troops.
When the parliamentary forces were besieging the town during the Civil War, there seemed to be no way in. But a young lieutenant in the parliamentary forces, John Benbow, was a Shrewsbury man, and he knew the local geography. And he led a party of soldiers along the narrow path that leads to here, to St. Mary's Watergate. An accomplice opened the gate. They stole in and quietly ran up the Watergate hill and opened the gates by the castle, letting in their main force. The garrison was overpowered and the town was taken.
Part of the atmosphere of Shrewsbury is in the street names. This is Mardol, or Mardivole, the devil's boundary, named after a legend that the devil could claim all the land within a stone's throw. And there's Shoplatch. Originally that was called Shetty Platchelode. Would you believe the dwelling place of the Shott family?
And then there's Dogpole. That's said to be from Ducken to Stoop, and Pole, a summit. It meant at the bottom end of the street there was a low gate where you had to duck your head to gain entry. One of the sights which attracts people to Shrewsbury are the number of hanging floral baskets. The idea was developed by none other than Percy Thrower when he was park superintendent here. And it's kept up today, although it's a lot of work. There are 300 baskets and they have to be watered every day.
We mentioned earlier Gay Meadow, the home of Shrewsbury Town Football Club, which lies alongside the Severn. Because the river's so close, there's a job for life for one of the supporters. The riverside stand is quite low, and it doesn't take much of a kick to lift the ball over the stand, through the trees and into the river. So a man stands by to retrieve any floating balls that might get away. It's well worth the while, because the ball goes over the stand as many as 5 times a match. Even though the ballman has a motorboat, the rescue can take quite a time. Once he was away for 2 hours during an evening match. What he thought was the floating ball turned out to be a duck. The bridge which takes the main road out of Shrewsbury towards Wales is called the Welsh Bridge. In the days when the Welsh borders needed a lot of firm handling, Shrewsbury was where that border was governed from, and it was from here that the troops would march out westwards to enforce the law. But not across this bridge. This is a replacement of the original.
The old bridge was just a little way upstream, opposite Mardle, the old west entrance to the town.
On the old bridge stood the West Gate, a very efficient barrier to anyone that wasn't welcome, and we can see what it was like in this painting from the Clive House Museum. When Henry Tudor was on his way to the Battle of Bosworth, he wanted to pass through Shrewsbury.
That meant crossing the Welsh Bridge. Now, the mayor was Thomas Mitten, who answered that Henry would cross over his body. When he discovered the size of Henry's army, and he realized the fact that Henry meant no harm to the town, he welcomed him in. But so that he wouldn't be seen to go back on his word, he laid down and allowed Henry to step over him. Then he got up, and they both went into the town, where Henry spent the night in a house on Wildcop.
When you come to Shrewsbury, you can't get bored. In the town at every step there's a new thing to see, or another alley to turn down. And if you tire of the streets, there's the River Severn never far away. But even if you're the impatient type who likes to cram a lot into your day, there's a lot more in the countryside around. You're not far here from Ironbridge, where the Industrial Revolution began. Or there's Wroxeter, where in Roman days a huge army was based. And if you like the hills, there's the magnificent Wenlock Edge and the Long Mynd within easy distance. So it's worth more than a day. Maybe 2 or 3 would be more like it, if you've got the time.